The Tory conference is in full swing. Earlier today, Boris Johnson delivered his leader's speech. Britain, wonderful, Winston Churchill, Captain Hindsight, Britain. Ian, beyond the recondite vocabulary after dinner gags and general whiff-waff, was there substance to this speech?
No, there wasn't. There was actually nothing of any real meaning at all. There was no structure. Last night, I was doing the papers last night, people were sort of talking, I wonder, will there be policy? Will there be policy in the speech? You get to the fucking speech and you're like, it doesn't even have a fucking argument, let alone policies of any sort. There was absolutely nothing of that. The closest you got to it was the pre-brief lines, which basically say, countries had low wages, low productivity, low investment because of immigration. Now, this is all part of a plan. It may look like fucking chaos of the highest order, but actually it's all part of a plan, and I'm fixing it. The thing is, that's, I think, quite telling, because it means that the only meaningful part of the speech was composed entirely of fictional propositions. Like, not one part of that argument holds up as true. It's not true that immigration reduces wages. The papers that they point to, there's an old sort of 2015 Bank of England paper they point to with this, which is the one that, Migration Watch and all the other sort of fucking, toddlers screaming at the moon go for. Even there, I think it was 1.8% in for low-paid workers, as a decrease in the rise of their wages, not in the wage itself, in sectors where there was over 10% were composed of European workers. So you really have to be desperate. What you do find is that middle wages, even sort of lower middle wages, have increased because of immigration. We also see, if you look at investment levels in the UK, business investment, it was soaring in the period leading up to and after EU expansion, when EU migrants came over to Britain. It declined during the financial crash. It then soars again until what? 2016, when fucking Brexit happens. And then you see investment suddenly stop because everyone's like, well, we don't know what the fucking regulatory structure is going to be. We don't know what the trading relationship is going to be. So, whichever way you look at his argument, it is false. And for the vast majority of it, it wasn't even, Karl Popper would be turning in his grave because most of the shit he was saying wasn't even fucking falsifiable. It was just gibbered nonsense, like a human jelly spitting in your face for 45 minutes.
Well, what it reminded me of was a friend, when we were very young, a friend of mine did a best man speech. Nobody had done a best man speech before, and he thought what he had to do was just jokes all the time. And it didn't go down very well because he forgot to actually say anything about the bride and groom. And it was like, I think jokes are good in politics when they can punctuate a point, but you just need to be sort of like flinging them off and making points solely to get to a joke. And it seems to sort of handily confirm Starmer's diagnosis last week that he's a trivial man. But does it matter? Is being a trivial man working for him?
Well, it's worked so far. Okay, and what's the distinction? Before, let's take the referendum result. You're talking about a very distant international institution. Most people don't get it. It doesn't directly affect their lives. You're talking about events that will take place years and years from now. In the general election, you're talking about, right, we just get this bit done and then we move on to something else. It's the ending of this bit, and so it's future looking. Over and over, that kind of bonhomie has, that kind of that optimism people are always fucking banging on about, is to do with the future or something distant. Things are now different. It doesn't mean that things will change fundamentally. They might not. It might be that all of our worst fucking nightmares are true and the people don't even notice the change in their wallet, the change in the money in their pocket, as long as, their uncle on fucking Facebook is saying a certain amount of gibberish. It might be that's the case, but there is a qualitative difference now. Qualitative difference is he is talking about your quality of life. He is talking about how much money you have to spend, how rich you feel. And right now, what we're seeing as a result of leaving the EU, putting up trade barriers with our largest partner, as a result of a labour shortage, as a result of things that are not to do with Brexit, like high gas prices, we are seeing a real decline in quality of living, and of course inflation in the background of all this. And then certain government decisions, raising taxes, cutting benefits. So if he wants to keep on playing that game of I'm optimistic, it doesn't really matter if anything I say is true. So far, he's gotten away with it. But right now, it's about the money in your pocket. And there, I don't think optimism and I don't think post-truth politics will have quite the same purchase that it has before.
New Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries gave the conference some red meat, attacking the Charity Commission's so-called woke agenda, that word again, and saying the BBC is staffed by people whose mum and dad worked there. Boris Johnson then quickly called the BBC a great national institution. Now, in his speech, there was some anti-woke nonsense, Hereward the woke, etc. But do people like Dorries enable him to some extent to play the good cop on culture war issues.
Yeah, I mean, just as Priti Patel enables him to a limited extent to play the good cop on Home Office issues, it's always useful to have someone to the right of you, to someone who's prepared to say things more crass even than you can manage. It was, yeah, I mean, there was a nod to the culture wars, as you say. There was no attempt whatsoever to engage with any of the tough stuff around the culture wars. Clearly, it was all just Winston Churchill, insult to our statues, let's not undermine British history, and that was as far as it went, which was summed up the entire intellectual content of the speech.
It is quite mad that if you are interested in those issues at all, that there are particular there are crunch points, there are some difficulties around, sort of free speech in particular. And yet the debate as conducted by the Tories is not interested in any of that in any way that might solve anything. It's just a kind of big nebulous sort of poison gas called wokeness.
Well, it's just an opportunity to watch the left tearing themselves apart, as increasingly they are over some issues.
We're always happy to do that.
And, and point and laugh.
I mean, it's worth mentioning, of course, that there were free speech policies at this conference. That Priti Patel went and launched a second assault on protests, which is quite startling in its breadth and its severity, with what are essentially sort of protest banning orders. They've been proposed before. The Home Office had turned them down in 2019. They were proposed by the Met Police. Home Office looked at it and went, fucking, you can't be serious, mate. And what you're basically talking about is telling someone they can't go on a protest in a preemptive way because they might cause disruption in future. It's too much for the Home Office then. It was too much for several senior police officers who were sat on the round table. It was too much for Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary. And now, out the fucking box, Priti Patel popped it out during her conference speech and is implementing these things. And these things are minority. I'm looking at Dorian, so I'm not going to call them, thought police or Orwellian, because I'm scared that I'm not going to get the term right and he's going to fucking pick me up on it. But it's very, very minority report. Let's put it that way.
You can have that.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, it's really fucking disastrous stuff. Of course, I'm not going to there's no point making the point a million. If the party gave a flying fuck about free speech, it would not be passing that kind of autocratic, draconian measure. I mean, by any stretch of the imagination, it's an intolerable thing to be doing. But of course, they absolutely do not. And the only use for free speech is, as Ros says, to batter the left.
Ros, Levelling Up Secretary and nightclub ledge Michael Gove has been talking about house building, watering down his predecessor Robert Jenrick's policies and shifting the focus to the north, away from angry Tory voters in the south. Is this just the power of NIMBYism, or do you buy sort of his argument that we should be sort of concentrating more on the north?
Certainly the opinion polls in the last week have suggested that the Tories do have a bit of a problem with the red wall. There is a bit of a move against them there. So that may have been noted. Also, it was very clear in this speech that Johnson has taken note of what happened in Chesham and Amersham and has decided that must not happen again. One of the big passages in the speech was about Stoke Poges, which is where Gray's Elegy may have been set, and is a place in, I think, Buckinghamshire or Berkshire, in that part of the world. And it was basically saying that it was a signal to people living in the home counties and similar parts of Britain that their beautiful views will not be threatened by Conservative policy. He was pretty explicit about that. And then there was a rant about how people like to be able to paint their own front door, which was just the most extraordinary cop-out of any kind of meaningful engagement with the housing crisis in this country.
I don't want you to stop talking. I really.
I can carry on, but I will pause.
So far, only 127 haulage drivers have signed up for temporary visas to deliver fuel to garage forecourts. Johnson has called this a fascinating illustration of a global problem. Is this really global?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there's the shortage. It's not global, but it certainly applies to lots and lots of countries. The thing is, what do you do in order to mitigate the worst effects of it? And what we have done is not a very sensible procedure, which is that you start ending freedom of movement. You do almost nothing to improve sort of conditions in the country where people face very, very tough situations. And you also create a political environment in which they don't feel that welcome. Then when you make the offer of visas, you make it in this really kind of mean-spirited way. That's like, well, do come over as long as you like. But obviously the fucking Home Office is going to knock your door down on Christmas Day. Now extended, of course. But you get the general emotional sense of how much they value people from that. So no, I mean, look, it's around the world, but you take policy, just like the rising gas prices, just like most of the stuff that we're seeing right now, it's around the world. But you take domestic policy decisions, which will have an impact in how flexible you are and how well you're able to manage these situations. And the ones we've taken were very poor indeed.
In shortage news, I saw today someone saying that the Christmas jumper company had informed that they may not have jumpers for Christmas because of shortages.
The sunlit uplands once again.
I think if you are a Christmas jumper company, that's quite an important deadline to hit.
Get knitting, guys.
You guys slagged off my Christmas jumper. I remember we did a Christmas show and I wore my Batman Christmas jumper, and there was a real undercurrent, I think, of skepticism about the jumper.
Christmas jumpers are a symbol of this nation's moral decline, I'm afraid.
Along with what, shorts for men?
Yeah, shorts for men.